if we are to imitate Christ, we too must suffer as he did. What do you think about that? I mean, is that what we have to do?
Well, I think, God brings us into a world, that's imperfect for a variety of reasons. And one of those reasons is, yes, I mean, we are going we have the honor of following Christ in the cross with the anticipation of the resurrection. But there are many other reasons, Gloria, why God would allow suffering. I mean, the first reason is our own human freedom, right? So why does God allow human beings to cause suffering to other human beings? And I think, the clear answer is if we didn't have the choice to do something unloving, if we didn't have the capacity to choose something that would be hurtful to someone else, to be unloving, then we wouldn't have the choice to do something loving either. All we would, be capable of is loving behaviors, right? If you don't have the choice to do something unloving, then all you can do is loving behaviors. And if all you can do is loving behaviors, then you don't have free choice. Your love hasn't originated within you, and you're basically following a program that the divine programmer has given you. And now this divine program, might be a loving, nice program where you never do anything wrong, but I'm telling you right now, you didn't have any choice in the matter. Your love is not your own, and that wasn't good enough for God. God wanted to create you in his own image. So he does allow us to cause suffering to other people, right? He allows the possibility of our creating suffering in order to give us that freedom to really choose love and to make that love our own. But there are other reasons why God allows us to be brought up in an imperfect world. And some of those, yes, they deal with the imitation of Jesus indirectly and directly. But I'll just consider a few of them. I'll tell you a little story about my father, who, was a very wise man. And basically, I came up to him, one day and basically asked, well, why are we created in an imperfect world? After all, if God is really omniscient, if he's all-knowing and he's all-powerful, I mean, clearly he could have created us in a world that was perfect, and he could have created us perfect, so we never have to deal with any, suffering again. And of course, we know why, this kind of, imperfect world comes into being through the fall of Adam. But why does God continue it in being, and why does God allow just people, right? The question in the book of Job, the question that comes up to Jesus again and again, comes up to St. Paul. Why does God continue to allow this enmity between us and this imperfect world to cause suffering, our own imperfect being to cause suffering to us? And my father kind of answered like this. He just said, look, there are some things far worse than suffering in this world. And the first thing he talked about, there's really the darkness of egocentricity and narcissism, of domination of others and self-worship. We don't realize, sometimes we find these things attractive, but we don't realize how dark these things are and the emptiness that it's leading us to, and the kind of the distinction between us and God that it's creating. And of course, what it is such a darkness that even St. Paul, right, and remember in the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, when he says, I was given, a thorn in the flesh, an angel of Satan to beat me, to keep me from getting proud. So the big thing with St. Paul is, pride is much worse than suffering, right? The darkness of a kind of narcissism or self-worship is so dark, it's much worse in the long term than suffering. I'll take the suffering. And of course, my father went on to explain, it's not just that, it's the capacity to serve other people. I mean, do you realize that if there were no suffering in this world, there'd be no compassion, right? I mean, if there were no suffering in this world, there'd be no way in which we would be tested to want to reach out in empathy to help another human being to get through that suffering, right? But as it is, there is that possibility, and it makes our hearts come alive. And that's, it would be much worse never to have had the opportunity to freely offer somebody, compassion, or to receive compassion from another in our suffering, right? We would just be left there. And my dad even went on to explain, even more. But go ahead, Doug.
No, I was going to say, and listening to what you were saying as well, is also the way we're made. It's like our nervous system. We feel pain when there's something wrong. And if there's something wrong, you feel those pains, you suffer. And somebody might say, well, that's too bad. But the reality is, if you didn't have that pain, you wouldn't know there was something wrong. And so in many ways, when we have these experiences, maybe, from an emotional situation or others, it allows us to go back and say, am I doing something wrong? Am I doing something that's causing me these difficulties, whether it's I'm working out too hard, or I'm not giving myself enough rest, or I'm getting myself involved with things that I shouldn't be getting involved with. And so in some ways, it's a warning sign as well, or at least a reflection. One can see if one is involved with why this is happening.
Well, absolutely, and I can tell you, as a matter of fact, from my own life, it was suffering that shocked me out of my superficiality. I mean, I was your basic level 1, level 2 egocentric materialist who was rather full of himself. Now, it's true, I still had God, kind of out there in the periphery, because my mother was a daily communicant and prayed me through it, but I had a lot of Augustinian tendencies, and I needed a little bit of suffering in my life, a good whack on the head to say, hey, wait a minute, is this all there is, or is there something more, or have I missed something somehow, And I mean, honestly, it was the suffering that got me to start asking the relevant questions, and the emptiness that got me to asking, what are the other relevant questions? Am I missing out on something? Why do I feel this emptiness? Why do I feel this darkness? Why do I feel this self-alienation, right? I mean, there's something amiss here, and then of course you discover how important your faith is, how suffering just opens the door to faith. I mean, can you imagine trying to deepen your faith without suffering? I can't. I mean, I was never that kind of a saint. For me, I was always the grudging Augustinian personality, right, who kind of went, I'm comfortable here, let's not push this too far, and of course, I've got a new level of faith suddenly, because of course the door opened, the vulnerability was important, and of course I don't have to even, tell people to the opportunity to offer that suffering up. I mean, we'd have no such opportunity. We would have no such opportunity to imitate Jesus, to imitate St. Paul, to imitate St. Teresa of Lisieux in offering our suffering up if there were no suffering. So at the end of the day, it's just, suffering is a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity to grow in courage. It's an opportunity to sacrifice ourselves for something noble, right? I mean, gosh, if you didn't have the possibility of suffering, there'd be no sacrifice at all. You'd never test your mettle. You'd never know whether you were willing to sacrifice yourself for something noble. You'd never know whether compassion or the giving of compassion was within your purview. You'd never know. You'd never be shocked out of your superficiality. You'd just be allowed to stay in mediocrity for the rest of your life. You'd never have those opportunities to deepen your faith. You'd never have the opportunities to offer that suffering to other people. I mean, honestly, a world without suffering, as my father would say, that world would be a very uninteresting place. A world without challenge, without courage, without self-sacrifice, without compassion, without deepened faith, filled with superficiality. He said, go ahead, just stay in your pleasure bubble over there. And for all intents and purposes, you'll see suffering is one of the best gifts you've ever given. My thought was, well, sounds right, but wish there'd be a little less of it.
Yeah, maybe you could delay it a little bit there, Dad.